Hey everybody, my name is Chris, programmer for A43. I'm here tonight with Valerie Castillo Martinez, the writer and producer of Death of Nintendo, for a live Q&A. Before we start, I want to thank our great community partner, Art of Me. So, Valerie, we were talking before about this film. It's a very personal film for you. Can you talk a little bit about the genesis of the story? No pun intended.
Sure. And hello, Chris, and everyone who's watching. Thank you to Asia's CineVision for having me. So yeah, Death of Nintendo was my first feature script that was kind of like it started out as a school project for grad school that all the producers had to at some point learn how to write a screenplay and direct along with everyone, in the program. So it just started as an exercise, a school exercise. But in order to be able to find something easy, or not easy, but just like something that feels personal and, where you can pull a lot of material from, I just decided to go back to my childhood where I grew up in the Philippines in the 90s. So that's basically where I decided to set the story. And then, if I were to think of like an event where a lot of people kind of remember what happened in 91, I chose the volcanic eruption of Mount Pinatubo, which actually happened in 91, that kind of changed kind of the landscape of climate change. It kind of started this El Nino weather phenomenon, and then it was also the end of the U.S. forces leaving the country, because after that volcanic eruption, the base was completely destroyed, and they're just like, "Oh, let's get out of here." Actually, sorry, we decided to kick him out because we wanted, So that's what kind of inspired the events. But visually, I have a very vivid memory of coming out of my house and seeing the ash fall. And it was just almost like a spiritual moment of me in the environment. And it's trying to tell me something about, this is a huge, force of nature. And, it's kind of like life beckoning, or I don't know, that's a little too deep, but I just remember it very, very, it was a very visual moment in my life. And I just decided that I'm going to write a script that had that moment when she was looking at nature and realizing that, oh, what's in store for me. And yeah, and if you haven't figured it out, I identified a lot with the girl in the film, running around with, her friends who are mostly boys.
Great, thank you so much. And because it was so personal, in other words, sorry, what was it like working with director Raya Martin to bring this vision to life? And was there any, how did you sort of communicate this personal story to the director?
What's easy was Raya and I grew up together in that very same neighborhood. So he's very familiar with all the kind of, the details and even like the nuances of living in that time. And when I left for the US, he stayed in the Philippines, pursued filmmaking, and, became Raya, the Raya that you all know. And I came at it a little later, but I reached out to him once I had the script, knowing that he's kind of more used to making a lot of more kind of experimental, very art house films. But I think when he read the script, he resonated with it from a very personal and familiar place. And he also wanted to constantly surprise people and not kind of being pigeonholed into just like one art form or one form of expression. So he wanted to do something more narrative, more traditional, and but it was a safe space because it was coming from a very personal and familiar experience that we both shared. And I think there's like a level of trust that we both had. I trusted him with the story. He trusted me to, help him make it the best film that we can out of it. So yeah, so working with him was wonderful. It was fun. It felt like we did go back to the 90s on set. It felt like we went back to our childhood, and we were just a lot of like laughing on set. And he also, um, when he was prodding, he was like really, really asking me very personal questions about the script because it is based in a very personal place that I didn't particularly want to share every backstory and every detail with him. But because of our friendship, it felt safe and it felt easy to hand it over to him and trust him with it. And then yeah, in addition to him, there are other collaborators like our cinematographer, Angie Chang, and our editor, Cyril. Like they're all like very close friends of mine. So I felt like I was just giving my friends pieces of myself that are very kind of like personal, and they took care of it. So I felt like that whole process was kind of like that.
That's great. You mentioned just now that you felt like you stepped back into the 90s. I'm curious about how you guys were able to achieve that. There were so many props and posters and toys and the wardrobe, all of these things that create the 90s for me. And I also noticed you had like an actual shrink wrapped box of The Legend of Zelda. Like where did these things come from? How did you get all of this stuff?
Oh, I give a lot of credit to our production design team. So we have, excuse me, Wami and Tessa Tang. Our two production designers had great attention to detail, and when I showed them the script, they were also equally excited because they wanted to give it justice that it is a period piece, and it is going to require like an amount of work when it comes to finding or tracking down these items. And so I think it started with a house that we scouted, that we really wanted to find something that would transport you when you walked into that house, that would transport me and Raya to our childhood homes. And then the stuff, yeah, it's the production design team that collected all of these items that made sure that actually it's probably a three-part process to that. So it's all the stuff, the production design, the props, and then the wardrobe. And then I think the another critical kind of like producing aspect of it is like the rights of it all. Made sure we weren't like what do you call it? Like we were doing the right clearance procedures, I guess, and not necessarily what's the word if you're like trashing something. But yeah, we're not.
Infringement, is that
No, like
I
if
don't
you
know.
like drink a Pepsi can and you spit it out and say this is the worst thing ever.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah,
yeah,
I know what you mean.
yeah. So
I don't know what it
we're
is.
not doing anything like that. So it was just
Right,
like
right.
it was part of the '90s. It's fine. Got our clearance lawyers on it. So that was more of like the legal procedure that I had to undergo for that. And then same for like some of the music too.
Great. No, that's awesome. Talk about the music. What was this sort of process of getting those songs? And then also, I thought the score was so interesting the way you actually used the Nintendo um, sounds. Can you talk a
Mhm.
little bit about sort of the inspiration behind that?
Yeah. So the music, like in a dream scenario, right? I would just get a bunch of the hits from the '90s and that I actually heard on the radio, and that would be my dream, kind of my wish list, and try to do the clearance for that. But in reality, can't really afford any, or maybe a one or two, and that's again in the producing side of things. That comes with negotiation. That comes with some of the business dealings of it all. But we ended up using maybe one or two American or international songs and then 2 Filipino songs that we licensed properly and, did that, all of that we were married to. Like Ryan and I was like, okay, we started with 10, then, it became just less and less because of the budget. And so the next portion of it was our composer, Yudi Arfani and Zeke Caselli, who are my longtime collaborators for my shorts. They're based in Indonesia, so very talented group, and based in New York too. Zeke is in New York. Talented group of guys who tried to recreate some of the mood and the songs that are reminiscent of the 90s songs that were playing a lot on the radio in the Philippines that had a lot of like reggae and kind of hip hop and reggae kind of vibe, because we were still like in a tropical island in the Philippines. So they did a pretty good job doing that. And then the third musical component was our our actual sound design or sound mix team, which is kind of a miracle that came down from the heavens, because when I was looking for a sound mixer, one of my, actually I'll credit my associate producer, Dan Sema, who used to work in Sony. And he connected me to Andy Sissel of Sony, who did the sound mix for Spider-Man. And so we were like, oh, this is like the pop musical component that we're looking for, because we had like such an indie crew and such a scrappy, like do it yourself kind of crew. And then we partnered it with like a larger kind of like, they make, like he made the sound design for so many like very recognizable like big movies, so. And he watched the cut of our film. He really liked it. It was unique to him, and he agreed to do it for us for a very small amount of money. And they were also nice enough to do. Sony was nice enough to do like a test screening, final screening in the Sony lot. So that was awesome.
Oh,
And I
that is
got to
awesome.
invite my friends and family for like a sneak preview kind of thing.
Oh, that's
So,
so cool.
mhm.
In terms of the writing process, apart from your real life experiences, were there any 90s movies that you were thinking of when you were working on the script as terms of
Yeah,
inspiration?
yeah, definitely. So, what comes to Raya and our minds would be Stand By Me. But that's more of like on the boy side of things, I guess. And then, because I did add that tomboy, that girl, I think I was also inspired by like My Girl for that. And then we there's a Filipino film in the 90s, very popular, that we ended up watching. We really liked it. Like when you're growing up and you outgrow something, at some point you're like, oh, that's corny or that's so cheesy. And then we rewatched it as, a bunch of 30-year-olds. And then we're like, oh, this is actually really good. And so we also paid a little bit of a nod to that film. It's called Roller Boys, where they do rollerblading basically. But it's a coming of age about these boys who are like wanting to grow up really fast. And then because, other than Roller Boys, Stand By Me, My Girl, like very white films, right? So I also liked Boy, like the New Zealand film, the Taika film my favorite
Right.
Taika film. So I really liked that, like it's kind of like a scrappy set in kind of in the middle of nowhere, a bunch of brown kids. I just love the idea of it, and it's kind of like precocious and fun. So those are some of the films that I was thinking of.
What were actually? Can you speak a little bit more about the religious themes and events that take place in the film?
The religious, oh yeah. So the Philippines is about a 90% Catholic country because we were colonized by the Spanish for 300 years. And so you saw, not only did you see like a church scene, all of the, I would say like the second act to the end takes place in Holy Week, which is, it starts from Palm Sunday to Easter and it ends on Easter Sunday. And so there was kind of just like a narrative guide to take you along for how the movie unfolds. So we do have very religious traditions that still occur to this day, every year around Easter, and that comprises of the procession. There's like a famous procession, and actually in different parts of the Philippines, also in the rural areas, where the men who are very guilty of their sins from the year before or the past year would volunteer to flog themselves, and then do a procession where people can watch, because it's a very sorrowful time that whole week. All the kids, well, especially when I was growing up, we weren't allowed to make merriment. We weren't allowed to like sing, jump on the bed, like that kind of stuff. Like we're just supposed to be like, just pray, behave, be quiet. And so that's very much the tone during Holy Week. And then there's also there's a clash between some mythology versus the religious beliefs, because pre-colonial times we were very much into like mythology and spirituality of like creatures, and we're very much aware that there are like creatures that lurk in the darkness, and a lot of folklore was the way that families would spend time to kind of bond at night and tell each other like stories by candlelight. So that's why there's some of that in the film too, where the nanny, Paula's maid, basically is kind of like the secondary mother figure to him that kind of negates his own mother's like religious beliefs. So she would tell these kind of like stories about like a white lady or a manananggal, and really influence Paolo to what do you call it? I guess imagine and I guess tell him that these things, these supernatural kind of like phenomenons, could be possible. So yeah, so I was trying to play with the themes of like religion versus myth. Yeah.
You mentioned before this that we were talking about how the procession scene was not staged. That was something that you actually captured. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So again, we were a very scrappy production. So I only had a day to get the crew, a skeleton crew, and then the kids to kind of plant them in that procession, that huge procession that actually happened during Holy Week. So we shot in March, end of March, and then I think the procession was like closer to the end of our shoot in April. So that was just on the schedule. So we just had to get the permission of the town that we were gonna be a part of this. And so we got the permission of this kind of small theater company that did the reenactment of Scourging at the Pillar. And then that was, again, that was done in a kind of a play type setting. And then there's the actual flogging, which I think we got some footage of it, but at the end we only chose like one or two subjects that we followed. And again, thanks to my cinematographer Auntie Cheng for, being so flexible and just take his camera to kind of capture all those things. And our actors too for being also pretty flexible to adapt to that space, to kind of adapt that storyline into what was going on. So that's how that was done. It was a shot in a day, that part.
It's the power of indie film, I think, to
Yeah.
put that all together.
Yeah.
This is actually this is an audience question, but it was something I was wondering too. The kids were great actors. What was the process of casting and working with them?
Yeah, the kids were awesome, and I think it's like what you see on screen, it feels like their real personalities are actually very close to what you see on the film, especially Mimo. The casting process came together quite quickly. We didn't have a lot of time. Again, pre-production was just limited to a few weeks for us, and so we kind of had the options to cast from theater actors to non-actors, some studio actors, and we ended up with kind of a mix of everybody. So everybody had varying levels of experience, and so the I think one of the last people we cast was the girl Mimo, because we just couldn't find like the right person. And maybe I was being too precious about it because I'm like, she's playing me, so she has to be really special. I'm not sure, but yeah, I think Raya made sure that they underwent like a mini acting workshop together, just so they can hang out with each other and actually really have fun together, and that would come on screen as authentic. And they did end up becoming friends afterwards. You know, they still message each other on social media and appear on each other's like TikToks and stuff. So
Oh, that's
it's
great.
cool. Like they ended up being pretty close, and then on set they were always active. Just if we're not shooting them, they're always huddled together in their tent, and um, Noel also, I believe, is a musician, so he plays guitar a lot, and they all sing, and it's very nice.
Was it a process to, I guess, teach them how things were in the 90s? Did you have to teach them how to blow on the Nintendo cartridges to get them to work?
Yeah, that was fun because Noel, I believe that first scene with Paolo and Kachi, that first scene when you unraveled that Zelda game, between takes, they were laughing at like, they were Paolo was or Noel was asking his dad because all their parents were on set too, just to make sure that they're okay. And they would, consult with their parents or us, am I doing this right? Why do I have to do this? What, they were like laughing at the graphics of the game because, it's very simple. Um, but yeah, they did some research too. They had to do like the dialogue, although it's not in English, it's in Tagalog. The actual dialogue is also dated to be specific to the 90s. So they were saying very kind of outdated expressions like, rad or like tubular, like that kind of thing, but in Filipino. So they would screw up some of their lines because they're like, what am I saying? And yeah, it's pretty funny. And Raya and I had a lot of fun just Raya was directing, but I was just watching from the monitor. But yeah, it was just a lot of um comedic kind of behind the scenes moments because there's a learning curve to trying to recreate the 90s.
Um, it's another one from the audience. The bully character is so interesting, and we don't often see characters like this. Being the more American one, can you talk about the development of that character and the details behind it?
Sure. I don't mean to say that all Americans are bullies, but maybe. Maybe there's a little bit of a tease to that. But again, because we actually cut a scene at the very end where the bully's dad is a military soldier. And they were about to leave the country. So in the end, there's like supposedly there's a scene where the bully does end up together with a Shiara girl, the girl next door, and they actually fall in love for real. And then they had to say goodbye to each other. But because we did choose to focus on the four kids primarily, we kind of had to let go of that scene. But that scene was explaining the how he was influenced by his father, who's a militaristic, you know, kind of on the rigid side, and that's why it caused him to kind of act out and impose on the other kids, kind of the restrictions that he's having for himself. And I'm a U.S. Air Force veteran. My husband's U.S. Air Force, so we kind of know a little bit about that life of being like we call it a military brat, of someone who lives in like different countries. And I don't know if you guys have seen the HBO show that's Luca Guadagnino has made. What's it called? We Are Who We Are. But it's very much that life of like the life of like not belonging into one place, and it causes you to do like very interesting things. So that was sort of the backstory for the bully. And I just wanted to make, while you have me on the Q&A, to know that we are very aware that we are making him say like very racist and like homophobic slurs. Like that's a very conscious decision, because we're commenting on a decade that was not, educated enough, and how we've progressed since then. So although it is a fun, time to look back on, it was very problematic. Like we see a lot of like problematic films and shows and just scenes of anything, of commercials or anything like that in the 90s that were like, wow, like this would never this would never make it now.
Right.
And that, I think that's the point. For that bully was just saying some pretty taboo things. So I just
Right.
wanted to make that clear. That was a comment and a reflection of like how problematic it was back then.
Well, yeah. I mean, it definitely contributes to the authenticity that you captured in the film, which I think is just so impressive. You just mentioned before about the scene that didn't make it into the film, and in the writing process, and I guess even beyond that, were there any other scenes that you had to lose that you sort of miss?
Yeah, I would say like we didn't cut it, but it was very much in the story. We wanted to spend more time there, but we just, because of production and access and all that kind of stuff, we were limited. So, for example, the scene in the cemetery, network's gone. Can you see me? It says I lost the network.
You're good now, but we lost you for just like a second.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Do I need to say?
Yeah,
Yeah.
just as you were starting to describe the scene, so we didn't hear the first part.
Oh, okay. So the cemetery, we only had 2 days to shoot in the cemetery. So we wanted a more elaborate kind of like 80s, like thriller, Michael Jackson thriller scene. That's, like very, very Stranger Things, except we didn't have the budget of Stranger Things. So,
Yeah.
so we wanted that to be more of a fun scene. But we had to cut a lot of it just because we didn't have the time. We didn't have the, enough resources. But yeah, I understand that I was trying to pack in a lot of ideas anyway in the script. So a lot of it had to be cut anyway, but this is why we ended up with a packed story.
Yeah, but I think that contributes to what's so interesting about it. All these, it kind of captures that feeling of childhood, all the different memories kind of packed together. So just to, I guess, what's next, Valerie? What are you working on now? If you can share, if you don't mind sharing.
Yeah, I'm trying to write again. So I'm trying to try the episodic space. I'm still very much wanting to champion more stories from communities. Like, did you lose me?
Just for a bit, but we got all the way to the
Sorry.
end before this started happening, so we
Oh,
can
okay.
forget about
Almost okay. Hang in there with me.
that.
I wanted to try some and more of a drama. So I'm switching gears a little bit, and we'll see how that goes.
Great. Well, I just want to thank you. Sorry, just make sure we have you back.
I hear you, but I don't.
Oh, okay. Do you hear me now? Were you good?
I hear you. Can you hear me?
Great. Yes. Cool, cool. No worries. I appreciate you sharing that, and I appreciate your time. Um, Definitely looking forward to seeing what's next, and definitely thank you again for joining us.
Thank you. And sorry, my internet was
Oh
kind of
no, like I
sucks.
said,
I don't know. I think it's raining here in Florida.
I'm happy we made it to the end, for sure. Cool. All right. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Ooh.